Welcome back to Standard 12A. In this second part of the presentation, we will focus on the major events of World War II. The essential question we're attempting to answer here is what were the major events of the Second World War, keeping in mind that this was such an enormous event in world history that people interested in World War II could study the events for years and years and years. We're really just focusing on those events detailed in our standards. The essential knowledge we're focused on is to know the order and the importance of these events. You want to, when we're done with this presentation, be able to explain to somebody the story of World War II using these particular events, knowing their importance and being able to put them in correct chronological order, knowing what the first event was, knowing what the last event was. We'll take a look at these events in chronological order. The first event, the invasion of Poland, begins World War II. This occurs in September 1939, September 1st to be exact. Some historians would argue for an earlier starting date. They would go back a year earlier to Germany's invasion of Austria. Some historians would go back to 1935 when Italy invaded Ethiopia. Other historians would go all the way back to 1931 with Japan's invasion of its neighbors in Korea and China. But for our purposes, we'll stick with September 1939 when the Germans launched their Blitzkrieg attack on their neighbor Poland. Blitzkrieg, as we see here, means lightning war. And for those of you who are familiar with football, you might recognize the word blitz when the defensive side tries to overwhelm the offensive line to sack the quarterback. And that's really what's going on here. The Germans were going to overwhelm their opposition in World War II. We see the importance of this. The reason why this started World War II was, if we remember from the first part of 12A, one of the causes was appeasement. Hitler had sat down at the Munich conference and promised to the English and other European powers that he wouldn't invade any other countries in return for being allowed to keep the countries he'd already attacked. Now, a year later, he's going back on his word, and the English and French in particular had little choice but now to stand up to Hitler. Problem was the German army was pretty powerful and marched in overwhelming numbers into Poland. The other disadvantage Poland had was, even before the German army started marching, Germany had struck a secret deal with Stalin and the Soviet Union to divide Poland between them. So in this cartoon, we see the marriage here between Hitler and Stalin. Just keep that in the back of your minds, because as we'll see, by 1941, that marriage has come apart. Hitler is going to attack the Soviet Union, but at this time, Poland is going to be attacked and divided between the Germans and the Soviets. We'll try and bring a little currency to this presentation. Each of these events just to show something modern connected with it. This is a little statue in Warsaw in Poland called the Little Insurgent, and it's just a little boy. You can see him wearing an oversized helmet, and sadly as a child all prepared for war, but this statue was dedicated to the kids and others who had to basically fight to defend their homelands during World War II. Okay, Hitler had attacked his neighbor to the east, Poland. Now the German army spins around and it's going to invade its neighbor to the west and its traditional rival, France. Okay, so June of 1940, German Blitzkrieg once again. Here we see on the map with overwhelming force, the German army invades France. Here we see the German army marching through the Arc de Triomphe down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Weirdly, Hitler was so excited and so surprised that France fell so quickly and they had captured Paris. Hitler sprints off in a car to go visit Paris, and almost like a tourist, here we see him posing with the Eiffel Tower. But of course, for the French, this was no enjoyable experience. This was a very devastating, embarrassing. You see the faces here, the anger and the uncertainty on these faces captured on Parisians as they're watching the German army enter the city. France is really divided into two parts, a northern part occupied by Germany directly by the Nazis, and then the southern part of France became known as Vichy France. It wasn't occupied directly by the Germans, by the Nazis, but it did answer to the Nazis in Germany. The French did put up a resistance led by a hero in France, a guy named Charles de Gaulle, who led the Free French Army to try and rid France of the Nazis. And this is I thought, a very sad monument. My French is horrible, so I'll probably butcher the name of the town, but it's Oradour-sur-Glane, I believe is how you pronounce it. And it was a town that, as the Nazis were retreating, they massacred hundreds of people, basically everybody who lived in the town. I think only one woman survived. And after the war, Charles de Gaulle, who became president of France, declared that this town had died for France. And so the town is preserved as it was on this day, with the bombed out buildings and the burned out cars. Okay, so at this point, the Nazis are rolling pretty quickly through Europe. There's not too many countries that they haven't either conquered or struck alliances with. England is really the only major power that's out of Germany's control at this point. England, which traditionally throughout history had been protected by the English Channel and the English Navy, now has to contend with the new technology of warplanes. Hitler is not going to try and invade England by a navy carrying an army. He's going to attack it by air, and the German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe. They're going to attack, as we see on this map here. They're going to attack pretty much almost every night for about 3 months from all the countries that they occupy in Europe. You can almost picture England just swatting away at these planes pretty much every night. It was kind of a cat and mouse game between the English watching for these planes attacking and the Germans sending wave after wave of planes to attack England. There was lots of damage, lots of lives lost, lots of property damage. Here we see a street scene in London, which took a heavy bombing during the war. This is the city of Coventry, a little bit further north than London, where the cathedral in Coventry, which was centuries old, was bombed out. Really nothing was spared from the bombing during this battle. But the British were very resilient. We see Londoners here hiding out in the tube or the subway system during the air raids. We see the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who kept British spirits up, flashing the V for victory sign, which he kind of popularized during the war. And this here is a statue that stands in England today on the very southern coast of England. It's a statue of a British pilot, and we see him sitting there on the ready, and he's kind of looking up at the sky, and he's really right there on the extreme southern coast, looking out over the English Channel, looking up at the same skies that were filled with German planes during World War II. Okay, the Battle of Britain, most historians point to as a big turning point in the war. It stopped the momentum that Hitler had up until that point. Hitler now looking for victory and also looking for resources like oil to keep the German war machine going, now turns on his once ally, Stalin and the Soviet Union. In what's known as Operation Barbarossa, the German army is going to invade the Soviet Union. Keeping in mind that Hitler and Stalin were once buddies who had agreed not to fight each other, now we see blitzkrieg unleashed on the Soviet Union. Again, the Soviet Union, though, is a much bigger place than Poland or France, and the Germans are going to run into some of the same problems that Napoleon did over a century earlier in such a vast land and dealing with that cold Russian winter. The battles of Leningrad went on for over 900 days. Almost 3 years the Germans laid siege to this city up here. Our yellow line here showing us the extent as far as the Germans got. Almost the capital of Moscow, but not quite. The Germans, went in large numbers, just as they had in their other attempts at conquest. Here we see sort of the street-by-street urban fighting that took place. And this here is a statue that withstood all the bombing in Stalingrad. It's based on a Russian nursery rhyme, and there are little Russian kids dancing around a crocodile, again from this nursery rhyme, and it withstood the bombing, and it's still seen today as a symbol of Russian resiliency during World War II. Okay, of course, the big turning point in World War II is Pearl Harbor, when Japan attacks the United States naval base in Hawaii. Hawaii, not yet a state, but it was the center of the U.S. Naval power in the Pacific. We can see on this map here, Japan had been pushing out from Japan, all the orangish colors there being areas that Japan had conquered, including lots and lots of little islands in that enclosed area. So we can see they were getting close to Hawaii, and this was really an attempt by Japan to knock out American military power in the Pacific and kind of free up Japan to continue its conquest without the United States stepping in to stop them. So the Japanese did inflict a very serious blow on the American military power in the Pacific, but it wasn't a fatal blow. They destroyed a lot of ships, a lot of sailors and airmen were killed, but not enough to kind of knock out the United States in the Pacific. The following day, the American president, Franklin Roosevelt, goes to Congress and asks for a declaration of war, and this is the event that now brings the United States in on the side of England and the Allies. If you ever go to Pearl Harbor, you can see the USS Arizona still resting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Okay, June 1944. So notice we kind of have a gap here from 1941 to 1944. Hitler is busy building up his defenses in Europe. England still remains the one thing out of his grasp. Russia, he's still fighting to control. England, though, is kind of on its own, and American soldiers are filling up England. They're being shipped over in large numbers, and by June of 1944, the English, the Americans, and the other allies, they're ready now to try and break into Europe. Okay, and that's what the Normandy invasion was, or what's more usually called D-Day. Okay, June 6, 1944, the Allies are going to invade northern France, the area known as Normandy. Okay, it was the largest sea invasion in history. Pretty much everything that floated was sent across from England carrying troops, and it really was just the doors open and the soldiers stormed the beaches. Thousands and thousands were killed, and one of the largest American overseas cemeteries is still there on the cliffs of Normandy overlooking the site of the battle. Okay, the war is going to drag on still for another year, and it's not until August of 1945 when atomic bombs are dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the war ends. Germany had surrendered in May, but the war continued with Japan. The atomic bomb, this new weapon, just the devastating effect, it did have the effect of ending the war. The Japanese surrendered a few days later. It brought peace and an end to the war. The famous scenes of celebration in the United States and the other Allied countries, but it did do enormous damage and destruction in Japan. Today we see in Hiroshima, this is the peace flame, and that building in the background is one of the few buildings that withstood the blast. That flame is set to burn as long as nuclear weapons are on Earth. The idea is that will be extinguished when the last nuclear bomb is destroyed. And that's what we need to know for this part of 12a.